I hope y'all have had a good time over the past couple of days. I hope you've had fun. I hope you've learned something. I hope you've seen some projects that you might can take back to your communities and rip off and duplicate. We are at our final closing plenary, and we're so glad that you're here. It is really my pleasure to welcome Ed McMahon to be with us today. I'm going to introduce him and turn things over to him. I will say before we do our closing keynote, we are going to be drawing some door prizes after he speaks. For those of y'all that may have dropped your business card in the bucket with one of our exhibitors, we've got some really cool prizes to give away, so stick around for that. And another thing, I know I've said it before, but I'm going to say it again, the t-shirts that we are selling are only going to be on sale through Sunday. So if you have not purchased your t-shirt, remember that QR code is in your program. If you need to see an example of what one looks like, they're at the registration desk out in the hall, but Sunday is going to be your last opportunity to purchase those, so we encourage you to do so. Another thing is we have, as you can tell, have been recording these sessions. So it is our intention, once we get all those recordings downloaded, we're going to put those on YouTube and share that link with all of you. So, you know, if you were unable to make it to more than one concurrent session and you really wanted to see one that you couldn't go to, you'll be able to watch those recordings. So give us a week or two to get that together and send that out. But that is something that is coming. So without further ado, Ed McMahon holds the Charles Fraser Chair on Sustainable Development at the Urban Land Institute in Washington, D.C., where he is internationally known as an inspiring speaker and an incisive analyst of land use and economic development policies and trends. Ed is also the past chairman of the National Main Street Center and a senior advisor to ULI's Building Healthy Places initiative. Before joining ULI in 2004, Ed spent 15 years as the vice president and director of programs for the Conservation Fund, where he helped to purchase and protect more than 5 million acres of land of natural or historic importance. Ed is also the co-founder and former president of Scenic America. Before that, he taught law and public policy at Georgetown University Law School, and he served in the U.S. Army. During the past 30 years, Ed has worked with hundreds of communities in all 50 states on a wide variety of land use, community planning, and economic development issues. Ed has also authored 15 books and more than 500 articles on topics related to sustainable development, land conservation, and growth management. Again, it's a pleasure to have you with us this morning. Y'all help me welcome him.
Thank you, Thomas. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be in Mississippi. I always love coming to Mississippi. I'm going to go pretty fast today, so I'm not going to do a lot of introductions here, but I just want to thank you for inviting me to this conference. I've attended a lot of the great programs today. I drove down from Birmingham yesterday, so I didn't see the ones earlier, but let's just go ahead and get started. I know people are here from Arkansas and Louisiana as well, and so what I say about Mississippi will equally apply. This is, you know, Mississippi is a great state. It's got great people, great history, great resources, and great community. But I know you all know this is true, sadly, there is no place left in America today that's going to stay special by accident. And you say, well, why is that? And when, of course, the reason for that is because the world is changing faster than ever. And you say, well, what's changing? And the answer to that is everything is changing. And the economy, demographics, technology, consumer attitudes, travel and tourism, energy. The weather is changing, in case no one has noticed in this part of the world. But, you know, there are really only two kinds of change in the world today, and this conference has been a lot about that. There is planned change and there is unplanned change. I mean, you can grow by choice or you can grow by chance. You can grow by default or you can grow by design. You can accept whatever comes down the highway or you can create the future that you want. You know, the real question for all of you in this room and in your communities is not whether you're going to change. Change is inevitable, but the real question is how. How are you going to change? Of course, the biggest unplanned change over the last several decades has been the global pandemic, which has turned our economies and many of our communities completely upside down. And we still don't know what all the impacts of the pandemic are going to be long-term, et cetera, but let's just talk about a few of them. It has certainly transformed how and where people live, work, shop, and travel. Let's just take online shopping. Of course, online shopping was going up for almost a decade before the pandemic, but did you know that online shopping rose as much in the first 2 months of the pandemic as it had in the previous 9 years all put together? How about working from home? There's going to be a lot of people who are going to continue to work from home, but it also provides an opportunity, I think, for small towns and small town revitalization, because in the short term, the pandemic has accelerated the out-migration of people, jobs, and capital from big high-cost cities like New York or Washington or Boston or San Francisco, et cetera. My son, who works for the U.S. Green Building Council, he's going to work from home permanently, like so many other folks in America now. And when you can work from home permanently, you can decide to live anywhere you want in the world. And so I think that that is a huge opportunity for small-town revival. And we're already seeing that. Did you know that almost 70,000 Manhattan residents have moved to Vermont since the start of the pandemic? And I think there's an opportunity for so many other communities as well. But sadly, as you know probably, that about 2/3 of American small towns over the last couple of decades have been losing population. 2/3 of all small towns have been losing population. About 1/3 have been gaining. And of course, they have a few things in common. Oftentimes they might be a college town like Starkville, for example, or they might be in the orbit of a big city. But the other reason towns are growing is because they've become great places to live, and if they're a great place to live, they're a great place to do business. I'll do some more talking about that in just a minute, because this is really a talk about the power of place and place's role in economic development. As Abraham Lincoln used to say, the best way to predict the future is to create it yourself. And you're all futurists in this room. You're all people who are creating the future of your own community. And growth is, about choices. Should we be investing more money downtown or out on the highway? Should we be designing for people or cars? Should we be growing on gray fields or on green fields? Economic development is also about choices. Should we trying to spend all our time on business recruitment, or should we be expanding our work trying to expand existing businesses? Should we be subsidizing big businesses, or should we be supporting small businesses? Should we be elephant chasing, going after the one big project, or trying to diversify our economy? So let's think about business recruitment for a second. There are 3,000 plus counties in the United States, 82 here in Mississippi. There are 19,000 incorporated communities in the U.S., 298 in Mississippi, 308 in Louisiana, and 502 in Arkansas. And all of those communities, historically were competing for a relative handful of plants, factories, or distribution centers. Our old idea of economic development was, let's just buy a piece of land out on the edge of town and we'll put in sewer and water out there, and we'll put up a sign called industrial park. It says industrial park, and then we try like crazy to get somebody to move there. And then in order to do that, we oftentimes had to give away the store to get them to move there. We gave them all of our taxpayers' dollars, and I'll come back and talk some more about that in a minute as well. So let's talk about economic development and the traditional site selection criteria that economic development professionals use to think about how to prepare a community for economic development. We have all these things. What's the tax rate, or what's the labor cost, or construction cost, or proximity to major markets? Do you have a rail junction? Things like that. Well, what's the most important factor in economic development site selection criteria in the nation today? It is called access to talent. Access to talent. Cities were offering Amazon up to $8 billion to move their corporate headquarters, to their city. There was a competition of 298 cities, and who did they pick? They picked metropolitan Washington, D.C., moved into Arlington, Virginia, which provided one of the smallest subsidies anybody provided. But why did they move to Arlington, Virginia, across the river from the nation's capital? Because it's the single most well-educated county in the United States. 35% of everybody who lives in Arlington County has a graduate degree. 80% have an undergraduate degree. So it was access to talent. I wanted them to go to a place like Baltimore that really needed the economic development. Washington, D.C. doesn't need Amazon. All it'll do is can drive up our housing prices even more, but that's what they decided. And by the way, quality of the community is the top factor affecting where job seekers want to live, the quality of the community. For years, all over America, we've had young people who have left their small hometowns. So they went to college somewhere else, they went and got a job someplace else, and they didn't come back. But if you have a high-quality community, a high-amenity community, they may decide, when it comes time to raise a family, well, yes, I'm going to go back there because it's a good place to live. And so the work of Main Street is really all about economic development and making the kind of community that people want to reinvest in. And when I graduated from college, we had these recruiters that used to come, and people would take a job wherever they could find a job or wherever they got a job offer. Today, it's completely different. Young people today decide where they want to live, and then they move to that community, and then they look for a job. I was on Frontier Airlines 2 years ago before the pandemic, and all the airline magazines wouldn't even have them anymore because of the pandemic. But I was flying on Frontier Airlines from Washington out to Denver, and I was reading the airline magazine, Frontier Airlines magazine. They had an economic development ad in there for Bend, Oregon. And, it was really interesting because they didn't say one word about, low taxes or regulatory relief. What they talked about was the fact they had 25 brew pubs, that they had a walkable downtown, that you could go skiing in the winter and you could go bicycling every day in the morning because of their 100 miles of paved bike trail. And of course, Bend, Oregon has been one of the fastest growing counties in the communities in Rocky Mountain West for years. So today, new investment is increasingly seeking locations based on the quality of place rather than the utility of location. When I was growing up in Alabama, we thought our rural small-town economic development strategy was, let's just widen all the highways. And then, of course, we just line the highways with a bunch of junk, and we called that economic development. And of course, we also thought, well, we'd been poor so long we couldn't say no to anything. Well, I want to tell you something. If you can't say no to anything, you'll get the worst of everything. And the communities that set no standards or low standards will compete to the bottom. Communities that set high standards will compete to the top because they've learned that if you say no to bad development in America, you will always get better development in its place. And so the fear of saying no to things is really one of the biggest impediments we have to better development in small towns in America. It's like somebody comes along, you've gone through, we learn about comprehensive planning or downtown planning or tourism planning, and we spend a lot of time and we get the community involved in it, and as soon as somebody comes down the highway with a proposal for a project that's completely adverse to the plan you've just spent a year developing, people say, oh, never mind. My good friend Tom Murphy, the former mayor of Pittsburgh, one of the great turnaround stories in America, he likes to say, I always say to the developers, okay, then you tell me how your proposal furthers our greater vision for the future of this city. And if he can't answer that question, I tell him to go away. And because somebody else will come back later with a better plan. Let me just give you one little example. There's a little town in North Carolina called Southern Pines, North Carolina. It's a big golfing destination, and some years ago they passed one of the first tree ordinances in the history of North Carolina, and the ordinance said, okay, you got to preserve large trees over a certain diameter within the parking lots of shopping centers. And, about a couple weeks later, Walmart shows up, and they tell them about the tree ordinance, and Walmart says, well, we can't save trees. What do you want, trees or low prices? And, of course, Southern Pines said, well, we actually like both. And they said, well, that's not possible. We can't preserve trees. And so they said, well, fine. You don't have to come to Southern Pines. And guess what? A week later, Target shows up, says, we'll be happy to build in Southern Pines, and we'll be happy to preserve the trees, because they were one of the great assets of the community was their trees. And of course, then A decade later, Walmart came back and said, yeah, we'd be happy to provide, provide trees and low prices, and now they have both Walmart and a Target. But they set a standard, they set an expectation for better development, et cetera, et cetera. There's a group called the Sonoran Institute. They're actually headquartered in Tucson, Arizona, but they work all over the Rocky Mountain West, and they did a survey of over 1,000 business owners, and what they found was that people were willing to sacrifice salary for the ideal community. I mean, think about yourself. I mean, if you could find the ideal place to live, would you live there, or would you say, oh, no, I want to move to someplace I don't really like that much just because the salary is higher? Well, it turns out a majority of people said, the community is more important than the salary. And so people on the move in America are looking for great places to live. So let's talk about this, the way the economic development paradigm has changed. So as I said earlier, when I was growing up, it was all about shotgun positioning and shotgun recruitment and low-cost positioning and cheap labor and, focusing on what you didn't have, that's called business recruitment. Quality of life really didn't matter. And of course, the most important infrastructure investment was always the roads. And who had more money in every southern state than anybody else? It was the highway department, right? But today, it's completely shifted. Today, it's not about shotgun recruitment, it's about laser recruitment. It's not about low-cost positioning, it's about high-value positioning. It's not about cheap labor, it's about highly trained talent. Turns out today, quality of life is critically important. Remember I said the quality of the community is the most important factor affecting where job seekers want to go? And I want to suggest to you that the most important infrastructure investment we can make in America today is education. Education. So think about this. I was attending the Texas Transportation Institute conference a couple of years ago down in Dallas. That's the biggest transportation conference in the country. And we had these folks talking about, autonomous vehicles, and they were talking about trucks, 10 truck convoys with one driver. 10 truck convoys with one driver. Well, it's already starting to happen. So my question is, what do you do with the 9 drivers who are now going to be put out of work unless you are investing in job training, retraining, re-education for the jobs of the future? And that's going to be way more important than just widening the highway. And of course, we always thought it was the one big thing. And so, all these cities had these arms races to build like the biggest convention center, or, a casino or an aquarium. I'll never forget the aquarium in Camden, New Jersey. So this is an aquarium in the lower right-hand corner here. That's Camden, New Jersey. And they said if we could just build an aquarium featuring the fish of New Jersey, that we could save Camden. Well, they did build that aquarium, and it's actually quite a nice aquarium, but did it save Camden, New Jersey? No, it did not. Because the one big thing rarely works. So what does work? Well, my friend Roberta Gratz, in her book, Cities Back from the Edge, likes to say that successful cities and towns think small in a big way. Or, as I heard one of the other presenters earlier today say, think big but start small. And, it's true that, the one big quick fix rarely works at all. People like to say to me, we're a overnight 20-year success. And I think, I used to like George H.W. Bush's theory about tree planting. He was a tree guy, and he used to say, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is tomorrow. And that's the way you got to think about community development. It is never too late to start to turn a community around. Communities deteriorate one project at a time, and they get better one building and one project at a time. And so, yes, small steps, small business, small deals, and small developments can add up to very big impact. And I think that's the kind of business that we're in, is the collective impact of what we're doing. Joe Minicozy, who's an economist up in Asheville, he likes to compare small projects with big projects, and he did this analysis of the Walmart in Asheville versus a downtown mixed-use project, and found out that the downtown mixed-use project was producing far more taxes per acre, more residents per acre, more jobs per acre. And that's one of the reasons why developers have figured out that the future belongs to mixed-use development. Because in every single way you can measure economic performance, it can outperform segregated, drive-only, all-by-itself development. Yes, it's more complicated, but as experience goes up, costs go down, et cetera. And, did you know that most new jobs in America come out of small businesses? Even in the nation's largest high-tech center over at the Raleigh Research Triangle, 71% of businesses in the Research Triangle Park have 50 employees or fewer. 42% have 20 employees or fewer. And yet, almost all of our economic incentives, state economic incentives, go to big business. So here's Maryland offering Amazon $8 billion, or Wisconsin offering Foxconn, that's the Chinese company that makes the Apple iPhone, $3 billion. It's interesting, in Wisconsin, they did an analysis of the state's $3 billion subsidy and figured out that it might or might not pay back itself within 30 years. Might or might not pay back within 30 years. And by the way, they did away with all their environmental regulations. You didn't have to pay any taxes either for 25 years. So let me just ask you this question, okay? So we're giving most of our economic subsidies to huge international global corporations. And here's an example right here in Mississippi, okay? So I'm not against big business. I'm all for big business. And I think this is a huge success for Mississippi. I think in any way you might measure that. And the state got Nissan to come here, and they built a $900 million plant in Canton. And that plant currently employs about 5,000 people. But in order to attract them, they provided $1.3 billion in taxpayer money. $1.3 billion in taxpayer money. If you do the math on that, that's about $200,000 per job. We're paying Nissan $200,000 per job of your money. Okay, well, so let's think about the Mississippi Main Street program, okay? In a 5-year period, the Mississippi Main Street program, which gets only $100,000 a year from the Mississippi Development Authority, $100,000 a year, produced almost 8,000 jobs. But of course, Nissan was one big ribbon cutting, right? Everybody's on TV, we got this big plan, and what you've got is 10 businesses here, and 5 jobs there, and 30 jobs here, and 20 jobs there. But those small jobs add up to even more than the Nissan plant added up to. And if you did an analysis like this all over the country, you would find the exact same thing. And so I'm not suggesting we shouldn't be subsidizing big business. What I'm suggesting is that we need to take some of that money and start investing in small towns in our communities. Because small towns and small business are the heartbeat of America, and they will produce economic returns in a way that nothing else will, at far less cost. So let's start thinking about return on investment when we start talking about spending taxpayers' dollars. And ask yourself really which makes more sense. So when you subsidize big business, well, you're pitting one community against another. You're moving economic activity around. And then when the subsidy runs out, these big companies, they threaten to move unless you renew the subsidy. Or another company says, I'll move unless you give me the same subsidy. And that you end up, as I said before, subsidizing big business. Well, now, let's talk about another approach. The other approach might be investing in a great place, which is what Main Street people are all about. Well, that creates lasting assets that are going to pay dividends long into the future. It helps existing businesses. It creates diverse, durable, local economies. And by the way, if you spend $1 in a locally owned store, it will recirculate through the community rate 3 times more than if you spend $1 in a chain store. And it's an example of communities investing in themselves, and it's a far more realistic strategy for most small cities and towns in the United States. So you say, well, what does investment in place look like? Let me just show you a couple of examples. This is Frederick, Maryland. My daughter lives in Frederick, Maryland, and back in the early 90s, it was a really struggling small city, like so many in Northeast America. It had suffered flood damage and disinvestment. This is called Carroll Creek, which is a little creek that ran right through the middle of downtown. And the then mayor of Frederick, a guy named Ron Young, he said, you know, what we need to do is we need to fix the flooding problem, but why don't we also turn it into a small town version of the San Antonio Riverwalk? And that, of course, was more expensive than just fixing the flooding problem. $11 million, which was a lot of money for a small town. That was all city money. And people said, you are out of your mind. That won't work. Can't do it. Costs too much, et cetera, et cetera. But guess what? Within 5 years, there was $300 million of new investment directly adjacent to that new Riverwalk. $300 million. And downtown Frederick, ladies and gentlemen, now has 5,000 downtown residents, 800 businesses, including 200 retailers and restaurants. It has become the fastest growing city in the entire state of Maryland. But it all began with an investment in themselves. Let me show you a little town I went to 2 years ago out in Idaho, Caldwell, Idaho. It's about an hour west of Boise. And it was another downtown that was struggling. It had a vacancy rate of 60%. It was, you know, the mayor himself described their downtown as like a ghost town. They had this big vacant parking lot behind the downtown businesses. And so they decided to take $7 million in city money and take that parking lot and turn it into a plaza. And in the summer, it's got, you know, water features and splash pads and you know, it's a performance stage and it's got fire pits and so forth. In the winter, it's an ice skating rink, okay? Well, they've become the hottest destination in the Treasure Valley. That's the area that's along the Boise front. In their very first year, which was, you know, right before the start of the pandemic, they had 250 events on a parking lot they never did anything but park cars on before. And they had 137,000 people coming. Now, foot traffic was growing at an astronomical rate, and they opened up a dozen new buildings just in the first year, okay? That's called investment in yourselves. All right, here's another thing. So successful communities are distinctive communities. That's about place, okay? The World Bank has this book out. It's called The Economics of Uniqueness, and they make a couple of points in like many different ways. They say if you can't differentiate your community from any place else, you simply will have no competitive advantage. This is what James Howard Kunstler used to call the geography of nowhere. Would you rather live somewhere or nowhere, right? Put another way, sameness is a minus in economic development today. It is not a plus. So, you know, let's think about this in a lot of different ways. So, first of all, I went to a presentation earlier today about asset-based economic development, which was, you know, really what this is all about. The unique characteristics of your community may be the only truly defensible source of competitive advantage, something no one else had. We heard about a pool in the middle of the desert in Santa Rosa, New Mexico, called the Blue Pool, which now has become the #1 scuba diving destination in the Southwest, in the middle of the desert. Okay, that's something no one else has. You know, Mark Twain put it a different way. He said, we take stock of a city like we take stock of a man. The clothes or appearance are the externals by which we judge. Let's talk about a community's front door, its gateway. And just like with meeting a person, a good first impression is important, and a bad first impression is hard to change. You think you'd rather visit the town of Franklin, Tennessee, or would you rather go to the town of Midfield, Alabama? Which one looks more like a community with a sense of pride and a sense of place? Which one looks more like a community that you would rather invest time or money in? If you don't remember anything else I say today, remember this. The image of a community is fundamentally important to its economic well-being. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that every single day in America, every single day, people make decisions about where to live, where to invest, where to vacation, where to retire, based on what our communities look like. What they look like. So let's talk about tourism for a second. That's kind of an important industry. It's the first, second, or third largest industry in every single American state. This is the travel brochure, the official travel brochure for the state of Oregon. Notice our slogan, Oregon, things look different here. Can you imagine a state travel brochure that said something like, Mississippi, things look the same here? Well, of course not, because who'd want to come? You know, the more any community in Mississippi or Arkansas or Louisiana comes to look just like every place else in America, the less reason there is to go there. On the other hand, the more you do to enhance the unique characteristics of a community, whether that's architectural or artistic or cultural or natural or whatever, the more people want to go there. Because that's what tourism is. It's about visiting places that are different, unusual, and unique. And this is an idea that goes well beyond tourism. It goes to the heart of what business is all about today. In the old economy, markets were incredibly important, but in the new economy, place is the most important factor. Even the National Association of Home Builders, NAHB, likes to say now that the place has become more important than the product. What do the home builders mean by that? Well, what they mean is what's going on outside of a house has more impact on the value of a property than what's going on inside of a house. The character of a neighborhood will affect your property values a lot more than if you have granite countertops or not. If you don't believe this, why do you think you could buy a beautiful Victorian house in Detroit, Michigan for many years for $15,000? Had nothing to do with the house and everything to do with the neighborhood. You know, so, you know, even the home builders are saying this. You know, and here's one of my favorite mayors, Mick Cornett, who's been the guy who turned around Oklahoma City. He likes to say the economic development today is really the result of creating places where people want to be. So I work with the real estate industry, and we have a thing in real estate we call the place-making dividend. What's that mean? It simply means people stay longer, come back more often, and spend more money in places that attract their affection. Places that attract their affection. How many people feel affectionate about the strip malls? People go to buy what they want and they leave. The average amount of time that America's been spending in a strip mall or a enclosed mall has been going down for years because all the stores are exactly the same. You just go to buy, et cetera, et cetera. But if you create a place that people want to be, and let me give you one example of this. In 1995, the city of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania did not allow outdoor cafes. No outdoor dining tables, none. They changed that, and a decade later, they were the fastest growing zip code in all of Pennsylvania, Center City, Philadelphia. And they had 4,000 outdoor cafe tables. And it turns out there's almost nothing people like to do more in the world than look at other people. So when you want to activate a street, get people eating outdoors. And of course, the pandemic has furthered that trend because a lot of people didn't want to eat indoors, period. So we had to start having more outdoor dining opportunities. All right, so I could talk a lot about each of these things. I'm only going to touch on a few of these right now. These are what I call dimensions of place or dimensions of uniqueness, anchor institutions. Mississippi State is an anchor institution. Healthy downtown, that's a dimension of uniqueness. We're going to talk about these. We won't talk about all of them, but I'm going to talk about a few of them. So let's talk about downtowns first. I think we have to go back to first principles, particularly when we talk to elected officials. Downtowns are critically important. Even if someone coming to your community, they're not going to invest in the downtown, they're not going to live in the downtown, et cetera. But they are so important for so many reasons. Look at this. This is an economic development magazine down here in the South. Note the headline. When sites searching the South, make sure you inspect a community's downtown first. Now, why in the world would an industrial park developer care about a downtown? Well, it's pretty obvious because downtowns are the heart and soul of any community. And if you don't have a healthy downtown, you simply don't have a healthy town. And that will be the first thing that people will look at to evaluate the health of your community. So if you're investing in your downtown, you're actually investing in the entire community because that is what sets the image for the community. And we've also learned that it's, the apple rots from the inside out. So an unhealthy downtown affects everything else. And we've also learned it's hard to be a suburb of nothing in America, right? And so, before the pandemic, we saw this huge thing going on in America. It was called companies moving from suburban locations back into downtowns, moving their corporate headquarters. Companies like Motorola, McDonald's, Marriott, Caterpillar, Walgreens, General Electric, Red Hat, Under Armour, I could go on. And why did they move into a downtown? To attract and retain talented workers. What was the top thing in site location? Where do you attract talent? Young people want to live in the center of it all. Amazon, they used to be all over the suburbs of Seattle, and then they decided to consolidate their headquarters right in downtown. And those 13 buildings used to be only one way to get to work at Amazon, was called drive your car. Now you can still drive to work at Amazon, but you can also take a bus, you can take a train, you can take the ferry, you can ride a bike, or you could walk. Because now it's right in the middle of everything. And let's talk about asset-based economic development. So Durham used to be a really struggling city, and what did they have? They had these huge vacant parking lots and empty tobacco warehouses, and they said, well, that's something we could take advantage of. So they've converted all those empty warehouses and vacant parking lots into productive uses, like their baseball stadium and like classrooms for Duke University and so many other things. Wheeling, West Virginia, this is have anybody here ever been to Wheeling, West Virginia? It's probably got one of the greatest Victorian architectural legacies in the United States. They have a Roebling Bridge, like the Brooklyn Bridge. And for years, it was just going down, 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 down. Their population went from 73,000 to 27,000, okay? A dying Rust Belt community. So they decided they were going to turn it around. So the first thing they did was build a casino, okay? And then they said, well, okay, let's have a Cabela's. But the Cabela's, which they subsidized with $12 million, was nowhere near downtown. It was off of the interstate 10 miles from downtown, okay? So did those turn the town around? No, it's going down, 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 okay? Well, 2 years ago, we named Wheeling one of the great American main streets. And it turned around because finally they recognized this architectural legacy that they had. And they said, let's stop throwing all our money out of our town and let's start investing in our town. So here's just one example of many where they took this old warehouse and turned it into an apartments, because it was really nowhere, nice to live in downtown. And this is really interesting. So the largest law firm in California, called Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe, decided to move their entire back office operations, that's all of their billing people and their research people, et cetera, out of high-cost San Francisco into Wheeling, into this old abandoned industrial building. And then they set up an entrepreneurship program, et cetera, et cetera. And they started really investing, and now they've got 2,000 new jobs in the last 5 years, almost all downtown, including the headquarters for an insurance company that was located in the suburbs of Cleveland, Ohio, has now built a new headquarters building right in downtown Wheeling. Let me show you how important downtowns are. This is the county I live in. This is Montgomery County, Maryland. That's our county seat, Rockville, Maryland. And back in the 1970s, they thought it was a great idea to tear down the downtown of the county seat and replace it with this lovely 200-store mall you see here. But guess what? Now they've torn the mall down, they put the downtown back. And it's kind of a metaphor for America. It's like, what were we thinking? What were we doing? We're doing this all over the country today. We're reinvesting and building new places and new downtowns all over America. All right, so let's talk for a second about historic buildings, neighborhoods, and landscapes. This is, some of you read some of Tom Wolfe's novels, like Look Homeward Angel. He's the guy that penned the immortal line, "You can't go home again." Well, sadly, Tom Wolfe, he can't go home again to his original house, because here it is, it's in this parking lot in Asheville, North Carolina. Why do we save historic buildings? I would suggest first and foremost, because these are the places that physically connect us to the past. These are the places that tell us who we are and where we came from. a city without a past is like a man without a memory. You know, Daniel Webster once wrote, he said, quote, "The man who feels no sentiment or veneration for the memory of his forefathers is himself unworthy of kindred regard and remembrance." So saving historic buildings is about saving the heart and soul of your community. But it's also about the economic vitality of your community. And this is a, classic example, a Main Street example from one of the early Main Street communities. And, this used to be the firehouse in a small town in southern Wisconsin. And they brought in Main Street. They started working with them to restore the facades of their buildings. Tells the story of the building, but guess what else? Sales of pizza almost doubled. Sustain that over a multi-year period. And of course now, and this is what we need to be talking to our elected officials about, the economics of preservation. There are literally dozens, if not hundreds of studies now that show that preservation increases jobs, property values, tourism, downtown revitalization, and provides affordable housing, and on and on and on. Let's talk about tourism. What's the biggest tourist attraction in New Orleans or in Louisiana? Well, it's called the French Quarter. I learned this because I was one of the consultants brought into New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, and the mayor and the governor, they said, well, we want a redevelopment plan. And they said, okay, and we don't want just a physical redevelopment plan, we want an economic redevelopment plan. So of course all the consultants, we said, okay, well, what's the biggest industry in Louisiana? Is it seafood, is it oil, is it chemicals? They said, no, the biggest industry in Louisiana is tourism. And the engine of that industry is the French Quarter. But that's so ironic because for 50 years, the Louisiana Department of Transportation wanted to build a freeway through the French Quarter. Well, it turns out the French Quarter is more valuable than any plant, factory, or distribution center in the entire state of Louisiana. But people just didn't understand that. What's the biggest tourist attraction in the state of Texas? It's called the San Antonio Riverwalk. What's the biggest attraction in the state of Washington? It's the Pike Place Farmers Market, which they were going to tear down, by the way, because a couple of people on the city council said, well, we need more parking, downtown parking. Like parking for what? You can have all the parking in the world. If there's nothing to do, who's going to want to go there? What's the biggest tourist attraction in Florida? Well, it's Disney World. What's number two? The Art Deco Historic District in South Miami Beach. They were all going to be torn down too. Now people come from all over the world to go to that place. I'll never forget taking my kids down there many years ago when they were 20-somethings, and I wanted to get them out to the Everglades, and they go, no, Dad, we want to stay in South Beach, because they thought it was hipster heaven or something. I don't know. And I could go on and on. Mark, I think, Arthur Frommer sums it up pretty well. It says, among cities and towns with no particular recreational appeal, those that preserve tourism continue to enjoy tourism. Those that haven't receive almost no tourism at all. Tourists simply won't go to a city or town that's lost its soul. So saving the soul of a community is kind of important. All right. At the Urban Land Institute, we do an annual report called Emerging Trends in Real Estate. And we interview literally several thousand developers and bankers from across the country every year and say, well, what are the best things to invest in? Where are the best places to invest? In 2016, we found a pretty interesting finding. We found that office space in rehabilitated industrial buildings was demanding rents above new Class A product. Office space in, like old warehouses, or old factories, this kind of thing. So let me show you what I'm talking about here. So this is a new typical Class A office building in Anywhere, USA. Let me show you another new office building. This is in an old brewery in Minneapolis, Minnesota. It turns out that buildings like that are getting higher rents, faster lease up, and less turnover than buildings like that. And why is that? Well, it turns out that, both employers and employees love space with character. And by the way, all these old buildings have huge floor plates, which makes them very easy to move things around in. And so all the employers today like lots of flexibility in their space. So this is starting to happen all over the country. So this is an old wharf in Boston. It's now the world headquarters for the Converse Shoe Company. Or the abandoned Sears distribution center in Seattle, that's now the world headquarters for the Starbucks company. Or the old post office in downtown Chicago is now the world headquarters for Walgreens. Or the abandoned Navy Yard in Philadelphia, that's now the world headquarters for Urban Outfitters. Or how about in Baltimore, the Tide detergent plant is turned into the headquarters for the Under Armour Corporation. Or what about this power plant in Toledo that's now the headquarters for a medical company? And I could go on and on. Did you know that, the patient rooms at the State Mental Hospital in Buffalo are now guest rooms in a very fancy hotel called the Henry Hotel? But actually, some of my favorite buildings are really small buildings, like this tiny little abandoned bank building in the tiny town of New Bern, Alabama, which worked with the Auburn Rural Studio to turn it into a new public library. And what they did is they simply put an addition off the back. And there are buildings like this all over Mississippi and Louisiana and Arkansas, and they all are waiting for new uses. They're an opportunity waiting to happen. And, reuse is oftentimes the last priority. It should be the first. And demolition should be, the last thing we think of, not the first thing. And there's so many reasons why this. You don't need to write all this down because we'll get you copies of this. But, I'm suggesting that the way the world is changing so fast, we need to start thinking beyond just historic buildings, and how do we reuse all these other buildings that are going empty, okay? So, we've closed 300 malls since the Great Recession. We now estimate we're going to close 250 more since the end of the pandemic. What do you do with an abandoned mall? Well, you could maybe turn it into a community college, like they've done in Austin. Or how about a big box store that you could turn into a church? Or how about another big box store you could turn into a health center? What do you do with an abandoned gas station? Well, you might do what they did in Louisiana and New Orleans, turn it into a cool restaurant. Or take an old factory and turn it into an elementary school. Or how about a grain mill in the little rural town of Buda, Texas, that's now their cultural center? There are opportunities like this everywhere we look. And by the way, all of these buildings have embodied energy, which means they're the greenest building. The greenest building is always the existing building, because it takes you 40 years to get back to where you started, even if you build a high-performance building. I want to end now with saying a few words about arts and culture. There's already been 2 presentations at this conference about the role of public art, one about West Point, Mississippi, which I'd love to drive up and see their murals, and another one about Lake City, South Carolina, I think it was. But arts and culture are also a huge economic driver as well. And I'd like to suggest to you that every community in this room has a story to tell. And oftentimes I'll come to a community, people will drive me around town, tell me the story. But I want to suggest to you that you want to do is make the story of your town manifest in the landscape, okay? And public art is a great way to do that. So Dolly Parton grew up in Sevierville, Tennessee, so they have a statue of Dolly, of course, down in the courthouse square. Or Thurgood Marshall's from Annapolis, Maryland, so they have a statue of him in Annapolis. But the story of your town, that's an asset, okay? I grew up in Birmingham. Birmingham was the Johannesburg of America, right? And, that's kind of a painful story, but it's a real story. It's a true story. It's a story worth telling. We have one of the greatest civil rights museums in the world there. And, I went to visit there 2 years ago before the pandemic, and I heard people speaking French, German, Dutch. People come from all over the world to learn about the story of Birmingham. So whatever your story is, it's a story worth telling. And public art can attract visitors and publicity and attention in so many different ways. It also can add fun and interest. So, you can celebrate famous people, maybe like Babe Ruth or William Faulkner or Buddy Holly. The middle statue, of course, as you know, is up in Oxford, sitting on a park bench. He's reading Sound and Fury. Or how about Eudora Welty's statue in Jackson? What about James Brown in Cincinnati? We have a new mural of Harriet Tubman in Salisbury, Maryland. I could just go on and on. Or how about celebrating famous events? That's the Great Depression statue at the Roosevelt Memorial in Washington, or the lunch counter sit-ins in Greensboro. But you say, well, we don't have any famous people from our town. Well, you got lots of ordinary people, so celebrate them. So you might celebrate watermen like they did in Massachusetts, or ranchers in Wyoming, or coal miners in Pennsylvania, or commuters in Washington. They're waiting for the bus, and the bus is not coming, but they don't seem to care, right? But it's a placemaker. It's something that tells you where you are. The Chisholm Trail mural in downtown Fort Worth, that tells the story of the role of the cattle drives played in the founding of Fort Worth. This is my little hometown now, Tacoma Park, Maryland. That's our family album. Each one of those pictures is important to the history of our town. Wiley's was the ice cream parlor that was the inspiration for the television show Happy Days, just as one example. Or let's go up to Nashua, New Hampshire. They used to have this diner called the Yankee Flyer Diner. It was an institution in Nashua, and it burned down in a fire, and they wanted to bring it back to life, and they did it in this mural. How did they pay for the mural? Well, everybody you see in that mural is a real person who lives in Nashua. They all paid to have their pictures included in the mural. Where there's a will, there's a way. And money will always follow good ideas. You know, it's appropriate they have the biggest baseball bat in America in Louisville, because that's where they make the baseball bats. Or did you know about the old postcard in downtown, Orlando? It shows you what the old Orlando looks like. You know, you've all seen those at, antique stores and stuff. Well, they have one that's 23 feet tall. And every one of those pictures is about the history of Orlando. Or how about this? Spokane, Washington, where they manufacture radio flyer wagons. So you have a piece of playground equipment, a piece of public art, and something that tells you about the history of the town. Or how about Hershey, Pennsylvania, where all the streetlights are Hershey Kisses? Which brings me to this idea that public art doesn't always have to tell a story. Sometimes it could just add fun and excitement and interest to a street. By the way, the girl is paint, the tree is real. Okay, and so there's so many fun things you can do, and every town's got a big blank wall like that. So what do you do with a blank wall like that? Well, you might do something like this. This is in Columbia, South Carolina. They finally had to put a sign up there because people were trying to drive into this thing. It's a trompe l'oeil, fool the eye mural. Or how about this one? How many people how many buildings have boarded up windows? And what do you do with a boarded up window? Well, maybe you could create some excitement by putting some interesting things in the boarded up window. And I could go on and on. Frederick, a town I mentioned, they have a public art trail. Okay, they have dozens of murals all over town and sculptures and so forth. And they have if you go into a local business, you get these little scavenger hunt forms. And for how many, you get discounts off things in the stores based on how many things you find on the public art trail. And so it encouraged people to walk around the downtown, et cetera, et cetera. All right, I want to end by, I've been in this business a very, very long time, and I've come to some conclusions. You've already heard all of these things today. And, it's interesting, all of us in this world of planning and design and economic development, we almost all say the same things today. We just say them in different kind of ways. And one of the things that I've figured out is successful communities always have a vision for the future. Now, some people might call that a plan for the future. And having grown up outside of Birmingham, I would go home and there'd be lots of people in Alabama who would tell you they're against planning. I'm against planning. And I'd say, okay, well then you tell me the name of any successful organization, institution, corporation, or community that doesn't plan for the future. Failing to plan simply means planning to fail. As the book of Proverbs says, without vision, the people will perish. And successful visions always begin by inventorying your assets. And, it doesn't make any difference if it's a downtown plan or a tourism plan, economic development plan. Successful communities build their plans around what they've already got. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives, not just regulation. Now, I didn't say I'm against regulation. It prevents bad things from happening, sets a minimum standard of conduct. But we need to think more about how to use carrots, not just sticks, in order to get things done. Successful communities pick and choose. They know that all development is not created equal. Some development will make your community a better place to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. Some won't. You need to differentiate. You need to raise your expectations. Successful communities cooperate with their neighbors for mutual benefit. People, oftentimes the city and the county are fighting with each other. Example of cooperation is the Blues Highway. Interesting, I was on a plane to Memphis some years ago, and half the people on the plane were speaking French. And I'm like, what is that about? And we got into the Memphis airport. I'm getting my suitcase, and I walk up to this French guy, and I go, what are you guys doing here? And he goes, we come to drive the Blues Highway. The Blues Highway. Memphis to New Orleans. Now, I can guarantee you, there's almost nobody sitting in France saying, I'm going on vacation to Clarksdale, Mississippi. But I guarantee you, they're going to Clarksdale, Mississippi because it's on the Blues Highway, and they're going to learn about the history of music in America. They're going to stop at all these little music venues all along the way, et cetera, et cetera. So cooperate for mutual benefit, which is what that project was all about. Consider what your community looks like. Have strong leaders and committed citizens. Now, when I was growing up in Birmingham, we used to make fun of Chattanooga. Now, that is not a very nice thing to do, but they were called the most polluted city in America. You know, nobody makes fun of Chattanooga anymore. Today, they're known as an international model for sustainable development and community revitalization. You know, or how about Susan City, California? Voted in 1990 one of the worst places to live in Northern California. That was, by the way, their city hall. It was in these 2 double-wide trailers. This was the only city hall in California that had to register for the Department of Motor Vehicles. But they realized something important. They said, why would anybody invest in a community that wouldn't invest in itself? And so they said, you know, public buildings are kind of important. They always used to be the most beautiful buildings in a town before about 1960, whether it was the courthouse, the library, the public school, and they were almost always downtown. And then we decided cheaper was better. And you know what we learned from that experience? We learned that cheaper is simply cheaper. And so they said, we need to set the standard in Susan City, and so they built a new city hall right in that same spot. And that began a decade-long transformation in that community, but it all began with an investment in themselves. Or how about Port Royal, South Carolina? It was just a funky little town outside the Parris Island Marine Corps Base, and this was what their city hall used to look like, okay? But then they decided to do this. The city didn't need all that space, so some of the upstairs went into a realtor and a lawyer's office, et cetera. And then a developer found this little piece of land right on the edge of downtown, and he didn't decide to put cul-de-sacs in there. He said, I'm just going to extend the street grid right into this part of town. And he went to an architect, said, could you design some new houses for me that look like old South Carolina houses? And he said, sure, we could do that. And they built 41 new houses, and they all sold in less than 6 months. And these 41 houses changed Port Royal, South Carolina forever, for the better. And so now, because you had 41 new families living right outside of downtown, everyone started to take a different look at the downtown. So it used to be just like one empty boarded up building after another, and somebody says, hey, well, that's an opportunity waiting to happen. So they started restoring those buildings one after another. And then they had this little elementary school, and because now the town is growing again, the school board says, well, we need to tear the school down, and we need to move out to the highway. And some of these new families go, well, that doesn't make any sense. No, then none of the children will be able to walk to school. Why don't you just put an addition on the back of the school? Oh, we didn't think of that, so now they did. They put an addition on the back, and now all the kids walk to school. And then they said, well, the post office is too small. We got to go out to the highway. And, you know, they said, no, we want you to stay downtown. That's where the post office belongs. And we'll find you a new site. And when we find you that site, you're going to build us a beautiful neoclassical post office. Okay? And, you know, that's how communities change for the better, one project at a time. Communities always inventory their assets, as I've said before. And sometimes those assets are pretty obvious. Welcome to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. World-class scenery, unparalleled wildlife resources. Or how about Annapolis, Maryland? Unbelievable architectural history. That's the oldest continuously used Capitol building in the United States. It was the U.S. Capitol for a very short time. They've built all their plans around the enhancement of those assets and that heritage. Sometimes the assets of a community are not very obvious. Welcome to Lowell, Massachusetts. 1975 was a dying industrial city, had an unemployment rate of 28%. It thought it had no assets at all, but what it had was abandoned textile mills. And it had a vision for how they might reuse those mills. Today, this is the Charleston, South Carolina of New England. Today, they get over a couple of million tourists a year, and they've reused all those old mills as affordable housing, workforce housing, luxury apartments, parts of the University of Massachusetts at Lowell, et cetera, et cetera. You know, adversity can breed opportunity. Columbus, Georgia, after a terrible flood on the Chattahoochee River, said, when we build back, we want to build back better. So that's what the waterfront looks like today. Same exact spot, okay? Or how about the Torpedo factory in Alexandria, Virginia? Now it's the largest art center in America. 2 million visitors a year go to see the 100 working artists in that building. Or how about Paducah, which did the same thing that Vicksburg did? They turned their flood walls into art galleries. Or how about Lancaster, California, that had this 5-lane speedway through their downtown, and they turned it now into a beautiful boulevard that increased business all up and down the street. Or how about Akron, Ohio, the home of the Quaker Oats Company that was going to tear down the grain elevators, but they said, no, we could use those as the centerpiece of our redevelopment project. So it turns into the grain elevators are now a Hilton hotel. Or how about Rapid City, which once again was saying, we don't have enough parking. Well, they took the parking lot out and they put it in a park. Made all the difference in the world. Or how about this railroad bridge over the Hudson River up in Poughkeepsie, New York? It's now a state park, attracting 500,000 visitors a year. Successful communities use education, incentives, partnerships, and voluntary initiatives. Why do we educate? In order to reduce the need to regulate. People won't preserve what they don't understand. Why do we use incentives? And there's lots of incentives besides free Cokes, things like expedited permit review or grants and awards or code flexibility. I could go on and on. We could do a whole program on that kind of stuff. Grand Forks, North Dakota reduced liquor license costs to get more restaurants in downtown. Stanton, Virginia provided free design assistance to anybody who would restore the facade of their building. They didn't pay for the restoration, but they provided the free assistance to know what to do. Voluntary initiatives, conservation easements, community beautification. Here's Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Did you guys know that there were no utility wires running through that battlefield in 1863? Did you guys know that? Well, guess what? They're all gone now because of a partnership between the state of Pennsylvania, Adams County, the borough of Gettysburg, the Ted Turner Foundation, and the National Park Service, a voluntary initiative to pay to underground all the utility wires in one of America's most historic sites. Or how about Yazoo City, okay? One of the great little towns in the Delta, but decided that maybe we could just paint our way back to vitality. And painting, just create how does this affect the image of a community, as we talked about before? Successful communities pick and choose. Davidson, North Carolina, they were going to get the typical CVS. They said, no, we want a 2-story CVS. We want it pulled up to the corner. CVS said, no, we can't do that. Davidson stuck to their guns, and so there's what got built. Do you know that you have a choice when a chain store developer comes to town? They can build, anywhere USA, or they can build site-specific. And, here's a Class A, Plan A Walgreens. Here's a Plan B Walgreens, a little better. Here's a Plan C Walgreens. Here's another Plan C. Here's another Plan C. Here's another Plan C. What you need to know, every one of these stores are different because every place is different. What's more important, the character of your community or some corporate preference? How do you think folks in Mississippi or Louisiana would feel if all of a sudden the federal government came to town and said, I'm going to tell you what your town's going to look like? It'd be like, get the guns, we're going to fight. But you let these multinational corporations come in and tell you what your town's going to look like. You don't have to accept that. Raise your expectations. If you say no to bad development, you'll get better development in its place. And you also need to know that retailers have changed all their old rules. So you've all seen this Walmart, but did you know that we have Walmarts like this around the country today? That's got 200 apartments on top, a swimming pool on the roof, escalators inside. It's got real windows that let in real sunlight onto the floor of the Walmart. How about this one in D.C.? Or this new Target in Chapel Hill? Or this Target in Minneapolis? Or how about in the home of Walmart? Where's their Walmart? Well, it's not out on the highway. It's right downtown in a 2-story building with solar panels on the roof, structured parking behind it, a sidewalk cafe on the side, et cetera, et cetera. It's never too late to start. So this is Lexington before, but then they passed a sign ordinance, and here it is 10 years later. Never too late to start. And leadership is important, but oftentimes unappreciated. I love this quote from Monty Python. It says, apart from sanitation, medicine, education, wine, public order, roads, irrigation, public health, and a freshwater system, what have the Romans ever done for us? And that's oftentimes the way people feel about public officials. And, if you don't care who gets the credit, you can get an awful lot done. And it often takes a small group of people to make things happen. And I understand it's not always easy getting things done in small towns in America. And this is up in the Shenandoah Valley, a little town of Buena Vista. And doesn't this sort of sum up life in small towns? 6,000 happy citizens and 3 old grouches. And no matter what you guys propose to do, there's going to be somebody who will tell you, can't do it, won't work, costs too much, tried it already. You've all heard that. And no is a powerful word in small town America. But I want to tell you a more powerful word, yes. Yes, we can make our communities better places to live in, to look at, to work in, to visit. A final thought, ladies and gentlemen, a vision counts, but implementation is priceless. Thank you so much for having me here today. Let me get my cane out of here.
Well, we asked Ed to fire us up and to lead us back into our communities with something exciting, and I think he certainly delivered. Y'all give him one more round of applause. We thank you for being here. We are, in just a few moments, going to bring our friends from Arkansas up to let us know where we're going to be next year. But first, I want to read off a quick list of folks who have won some prizes from our exhibitors. We do not have them here for you. If I call your name, it's sort of your job to find the exhibitor and get your thing before you leave. I know some of them have been left at the registration desk, but we want to thank all of our exhibitors for being here and for offering the door prizes. All right, the Mississippi Development Authority has given us 3 Mississippi Museum of Art coffee table books, and those go to Patricia Norris, Michael Riso, and Christian Munger. Belinda Stewart Architects has put together a bag consisting of a canvas tote, their 30th anniversary monograph, and some other things. Steve Harris is the winner of that from Belinda Stewart Architects. PPM Consultants got some Mississippi State University cheese. Andrew Miller and Courtney Hornsby are the winners of that. If those folks, like, as I call these out, if y'all know these people, if they've already left or not here, y'all maybe can help get them to them as well. Renaissance Community Loan Fund has 3 different things they're giving away. The pottery platter goes to Beth Waldo. The gift bag that's got some Christmas ornaments in it goes to Courtney Hornsby. I just called her name, so she's won 2 things. And Cool Mississippi cutting board goes to Brantley Snipes. Downtown Decorations did a $50 gift card to Best Buy. Kathy Bourgeois, you won that. PM Environmental, $100 iTunes gift card to Josh Davenport. Mississippi Prison Industries did a tailgate grill. Chip Johnson, you're going to be grilling something tonight. Allen and Hoschel did a Arctic backpack cooler, really cool. Elizabeth Beam, Ripley, you got that. And then WAS Design is giving away a tumbler to Fair and Rainey. Custom Products Corporation did a bag of goodies with a Destination Downtown tumbler. That's Christy Hopper. And Lucky Elephant Social is giving away an Igloo cooler bag to Mark Ross. So if you were one of those folks that I just called out, make sure you go and see that exhibitor on your way out. Before we turn it over, I just want to, again, on behalf of the Mississippi Main Street Association, say thank y'all for being here, and we hope y'all have had a wonderful, wonderful time. We hope you travel safely back to wherever you came from and take some of what you've learned and make your place better. So without further ado, is it Greg? Are you the one that's coming up?
I don't either, but that's all right. We'll figure it out. Well, we figure this where the video's coming from.
Do you know where the video's coming from?
Okay, I'll just talk for a minute, or tell a joke, or whatever. This has been a fantastic conference. I think we can all agree on that. So while we're trying to figure this out, let's just thank Thomas, Jennifer, Jeannie, and Beth again for these last few days.
For the presentation, if you know which one it is, then feel free to open it up. Otherwise,
That's all right. Not a problem. Well, as you all know, this conference rotates, every year. And we are thrilled to have it in Arkansas next year. The dates will be September 14, 15, and 16. And we will be in downtown North Little Rock, which we call Argenta. So we're very excited about that. Number one, because you're coming to Arkansas. But number two, Argenta is one of three of our programs that are pretty much just in a linear fashion. We have the Soma District, which a lot of you have been in Little Rock. Then we have downtown Little Rock. And then you cross the river and we have Argenta. So there will be a lot of things to do, a lot of things to see, some good tours. The board president, Josh Davenport, is here. Josh, do you have any, you want to say hi or welcome or?
Well, just want to thank you all. This is a great event, and we've got big shoes to fill, but
Don't worry about it.
next year. Maybe we'll do mimosas.
Don't worry about it. I missed that, but it sounds good, whatever you said. I agree. I have no idea. Is that it? Okay, cool. Who knows? That's always good to do. Oh, you're talking to somebody that didn't know what the heck he's doing. Yeah, I'll just, oh,
Yep, is that what you're looking for?
just click.
Give it a second. And real quick, we're just gonna. And we can, oops. Why is that still open?
People that know me know this is funny.
You can also use this if you want it. Actually, is it on?
Yeah, you can do that.
It's on, and you should be able to, yep,
I thought it was a video.
it's what I was given.
Oh, he just put together, well, Chris? All right, yeah, Chris, who's the director who could not be here, just put together a PowerPoint. I thought it was a video. There is, okay. So, all right, this is their outdoor dining district, which won a Main Street Forward Award from Main Street America. So, it's just beautiful shots there. There it is at night. Oh, and there's the video. Lovely black screen. No, but that's all right. All right. So, we're going to Argenta. Sorry about that. Most of you have been there, so, but it has undergone quite a bit of change just in the last few years. A huge public plaza, a lot of downtown apartments, living space, great restaurants, a couple of fabulous craft breweries. So we'll have a good time. So thank you all for being here. As Thomas said, drive safe, and we will see y'all next year in Argenta. Thanks.